The fluorescent lights of the courtroom hummed, a dull counterpoint to the frantic drumming of my fingers against the polished mahogany table. My lawyer, Ms. Evans, a woman whose crisp gray suits and sharper tongue had become strangely comforting over the past few months, leaned in, her voice low. Mr. Allen, are you sure about this? We can still postpone. This isn't just about the company anymore. It's about your family. Postpone, I scoffed, the word catching in my throat. My gaze drifted to the opposite side of the courtroom where my brother, Mark, sat flanked by his own legal team, a smug smirk playing on his lips. He thinks he can get away with this. He thinks he can just steal everything my father built, everything that should have been mine, and walk away unscathed. He's wrong. A father's love knows no bounds, even in the face of unthinkable violence. My daughter, Tess, lay in a hospital bed, her body broken, her spirit shattered. This wasn't just about a company, it was about justice, about retribution for the pain he had inflicted on my family. Ms. Evans sighed, a sound that conveyed both exasperation and a grudging respect. I understand your anger, Mr. Allen, I truly do, but this is a complex case. We need more time to build a stronger argument against your brother's claims. Rushing into this could jeopardize everything. We've been over this, Ms. Evans, I said, my voice tight with barely suppressed fury. I have the evidence. I know what he did. I tapped a thick manila folder resting on the table. It's all in here. Inside that folder were copies of emails, bank statements, and confidential company documents, all meticulously collected over months of painstaking investigation, all pointing to Mark's elaborate scheme to usurp control of Allen Industries. Circumstantial, Mr. Allen, Ms. Evans countered, her tone firm. It's strong, yes, but not enough to guarantee a win. Your brother has powerful lawyers. They'll twist every piece of evidence, discredit every witness. I met her gaze, my own unwavering. Then let them try. I'm not backing down. I thought of Tess, her face pale and drawn. The bandage is a stark reminder of Mark's cruelty. He hadn't just betrayed me, he'd destroyed a part of my daughter's life, and for that, he would pay. The bailiff called the court to order, the sudden hush amplifying the tension in the room. Judge Thompson, a stern-faced woman with a reputation for impartiality, entered and took her seat. The preliminary proceedings began, a monotonous drone of legal jargon that seemed to stretch on for an eternity. I struggled to focus, my mind racing, replaying the events that had led me to this moment. Mark's betrayal hadn't been sudden, it had been a slow, insidious poison, seeping into the fabric of our family for years. He'd always been the favored son, the golden boy, while I was the overlooked, the disregarded. He charmed his way into my father's good graces, whispering lies and manipulating situations to his advantage. I saw it, I knew it, but my father, blinded by his affection for Mark, refused to believe me. Objection, Your Honor, Mark's lawyer, a slick, silver-haired man named Mr. Caldwell, boomed, his voice cutting through my thoughts. Mr. Allen's accusations are baseless and inflammatory. Judge Thompson turned her gaze to me. Mr. Allen, do you have any evidence to support your claims? I do, Your Honor, I said, my voice steady despite the churning in my stomach. I pushed the manila folder towards Ms. Evans, who, with a resigned sigh, presented it to the court. The next few hours were a blur of testimonies, cross-examinations, and legal maneuvering. Mr. Caldwell, true to Ms. Evans' prediction, dissected every piece of evidence, twisting its meaning, casting doubt on its authenticity. He painted me as a disgruntled brother, driven by jealousy and resentment, while portraying Mark as a victim of my unfounded accusations. Mr. Allen, Mr. Caldwell sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. Isn't it true that you've always been envious of your brother's success? My success? I retorted, the anger bubbling to the surface. He stole everything from me, he manipulated our father, he undermined my efforts, he sabotaged my projects. He's a liar and a thief, order. Judge Thompson banged her gavel, her voice sharp. Mr. Allen, you will control yourself. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. I knew I couldn't let my emotions get the better of me. I had to stay focused, had to play this game by their rules, even though every fiber of my being screamed in protest. I thought of Tess again, of the fear in her eyes, of the whispered plea for help. That image, that memory, was my anchor, my source of strength. The day wore on, the tension in the courtroom thickening with each passing hour. Witness after witness took the stand, their testimonies adding another layer of complexity to the already tangled web of accusations and counter-accusations. My family sat behind me, their faces etched with worrying and concern. My mother squeezed my hand, her silent support a comforting presence in the midst of the chaos. As the court adjourned for the day, exhaustion settled over me like a heavy blanket. Ms. Evans approached, her expression grim. "We're not doing well, Mr. Allen. The judge seems to be leaning towards your brother's side. We need something stronger, something irrefutable, if we're going to win this." "I know," I said, rubbing my tired eyes. "I'm working on it." Back at my hotel room, I paced restlessly, my mind racing. I knew what I had to do, but the thought of it filled me with a mixture of dread and determination. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I'd been hesitant to call. "Hello," a hesitant voice answered. "It's Jason Allen," I said, my voice low. "I need your help." There was a long silence on the other end, then a sigh. "I knew this day would come. What do you need?" The conversation was short and to the point. I laid out my plan, explaining what I needed from my contact, the risks involved, and the potential rewards. He agreed, albeit reluctantly, and we arranged a meeting for the following morning. The next day in court, the atmosphere was even more charged than before. Mark and his lawyers seemed confident, their smug smiles radiating an almost palpable sense of victory. But I knew, deep down, that the game wasn't over yet. I had one last card to play. As Mr. Caldwell was delivering his closing arguments, a confident smirk plastered across his face. I stood up. "Your Honor," I said, my voice ringing out in the silent courtroom, "I have new evidence to present." The judge raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "Mr. Allen, this is highly irregular. We're in the middle of closing arguments." "I understand, Your Honor," I said, my heart pounding against my ribs. "But this evidence is crucial to the case. It will prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that my brother is guilty of fraud and embezzlement." Mr. Caldwell sputtered in protest, but the judge silenced him with a wave of her hand. "Very well, Mr. Allen, you may present your evidence." I took a deep breath and stepped forward. This was it. Everything hinged on this moment. I placed a small USB drive on the table, my hand trembling slightly. This drive contains recordings of conversations between my brother and his accomplices, detailing their scheme to defraud the company and steal my inheritance. It also contains documented proof of illegal offshore accounts and falsified financial records. A hush fell over the courtroom. Mark's face paled, the smug smirk vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. Mr. Caldwell stared at the USB drive, his eyes wide with disbelief. The judge, her expression unreadable, signaled for the bailiff to retrieve the drive. The next few minutes felt like an eternity as the courtroom clerk downloaded the contents of the drive onto the court's computer. The silence was broken only by the quiet hum of the machine and the collective intake of breath as the incriminating evidence flashed across the screen. Email exchanges, bank statements, recorded conversations all laid bare for everyone to see. Mark's elaborate scheme, his carefully constructed web of lies, unraveled before him, piece by piece. The look on Mark's face was priceless. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him ashen and trembling. The smugness was gone, replaced by a stark terror that I had never seen before. He knew, in that moment, that he was caught, that his game was up. The judge, after reviewing the evidence, turned to Mark. "Mr. Allen," she said, her voice cold and hard, "do you have anything to say in your defense?" Mark opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He just sat there, stunned into silence, the weight of his crimes crushing him. The verdict, when it came, was swift and decisive. The judge ruled in my favor, stripping Mark of his control over Allen Industries and ordering him to pay restitution for the damages he had caused. He was also facing criminal charges, with the possibility of a lengthy prison sentence. As I left the courtroom, a sense of weary satisfaction washed over me. It wasn't the triumphant victory I'd imagined, but it was enough. Justice had been served. My daughter, my family, would finally have peace. The storm had passed, and though the scars remained, we would heal together. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. I would rebuild what Mark had destroyed, and I would do it for my family, for Tess, for the legacy of my father, and for myself. This was just the beginning. The chipped porcelain sink was cold against my elbows. I stared at my reflection, the fluorescent lights of the courthouse bathroom casting an unflattering pallor on my face. lines etched deeper than I remembered, bracketing my mouth, fanning from the corners of my eyes. Jason Allen, 42 years old, and feeling every goddamn one of them. My stomach churned, a knot tightening with each ragged breath. Just breathe, Jason, I muttered to the mirror, the words hollow even to my own ears. Just breathe. This waiting, this agonizing anticipation, was a special kind of hell. Outside those bathroom doors, lawyers paced, their voices a hushed drone punctuated by the sharp clack of heels against the marble floor. Families huddled together, whispering anxieties and reassurances. And somewhere out there, amidst the legal labyrinth, was Cade, the man who'd know. I wouldn't go there. Not yet. I splashed cold water on my face, the shock momentarily clearing the fog of memory. Focus on the task at hand, I told myself. Focus on getting justice for Tess. But the past, like a persistent phantom limb, kept tugging me back. And one memory, sharp and vivid as broken glass, kept surfacing. It was Christmas morning. I was 10, maybe 11. The air crackled with that unique festive electricity, a mix of anticipation and the sugary sweetness of cinnamon rolls baking in the oven. Our living room, usually a subdued space, was transformed. A towering Christmas tree, adorned with shimmering ornaments and twinkling lights, dominated the room. Presents, wrapped in brightly colored paper and tied with elaborate bows, lay scattered beneath its branches. It was a scene from a Norman Rockwell painting, a perfect tableau of family harmony. Except for me, it wasn't. My younger brother, Mark, was the center of attention, as always. He was 5 years younger, a cherubic-faced charmer with an uncanny ability to wrap everyone around his little finger. That morning, he was tearing through his gifts, with the unrestrained glee of a kid who knew he was the king of the castle. He'd gotten a brand new bicycle, gleaming red and chrome, the kind I'd been dreaming about for years. He shrieked with delight, immediately abandoning the pile of other gifts to straddle the shiny new seat. "Look, Dad," he crowed, his voice ringing with triumph. "A red rocket, just like I wanted." Our father, a stern, imposing man with eyes that could freeze you in your tracks, beamed. He knelt beside Mark, adjusting the handlebars and offering words of encouragement. "That's my boy," he said, his voice thick with pride. "A natural. You'll be riding like a pro in no time." I stood off to the side, clutching my own meager gifts, a couple of books and a sweater to sizes too big. The knot in my stomach, a familiar companion even then, tightened. I'd also asked for a bike, hinted, pleaded, even drawn detailed pictures of the exact model I wanted. But my request, like so many others, had seemingly vanished into thin air. "What about Jason, Dad?" My mother's voice, soft and hesitant, cut through the celebratory atmosphere. "He wanted a bike too." My father straightened up, his smile fading slightly. He glanced at me, his eyes devoid of the warmth he'd showered on Mark. "Jason's old enough to understand that we can't always get what we want," he said, his tone dismissive. "Besides," he added, turning back to Mark, "Mark needs it more. He's smaller." Smaller. The word hung in the air, a single syllable that encapsulated the vast chasm between Mark and me, the unspoken hierarchy that governed our family. Mark, the golden child, the favored son, and me, the afterthought, the one who always came up short. I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing a smile I didn't feel. "Yeah, Mom, it's okay," I mumbled, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't really need a bike, but I did. God, how I did. I wanted to feel the wind in my hair, the rush of speed, the freedom of two wheels beneath me. I wanted to feel the same pride in my father's eyes that Mark was basking in." Later that day, after the festivities had died down and the house had fallen into a post-Christmas lull, I found myself wandering into the garage. Mark's new bike, still gleaming under the dim light, stood propped against the wall. I couldn't resist. I cautiously approached the bike, my fingers tracing the smooth curves of the handlebars. I imagined myself riding it, flying down the street, leaving all my worries and disappointments behind. Suddenly, Mark appeared in the doorway, his face contorted in a mixture of anger and possessiveness. "Don't touch my bike," he shrieked, his voice shrill. "It's mine." "I was just looking," I said, my voice defensive. "No, you weren't. You were going to steal it." He rushed towards me, his small fists flailing. I instinctively pushed him away, not hard, just enough to create some distance. But he stumbled, his foot catching on a loose piece of carpet, and he fell, hitting his head against the concrete floor. He started to cry, a high-pitched wail that echoed through the garage. My heart pounded in my chest, a mixture of fear and guilt washing over me. Our father appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of thunder. He took one look at Mark, then at me, and his eyes narrowed. "What did you do to your brother?" he demanded, his voice laced with fury. "I didn't mean to," I stammered, my voice trembling. "He fell. Don't lie to me," he roared, grabbing me by the arm and pulling me towards him. His grip was like iron, digging into my flesh. Mark continued to cry, embellishing his story with exaggerated sobs and accusations. He pushed me, he tried to steal my bike. My father didn't even bother to ask for my side of the story. He dragged me into the house, his grip tightening with each step. He didn't speak, but the look in his eyes, the sheer coldness and disappointment, spoke volumes. The punishment was swift and brutal. No Christmas dinner, no presents, just a long, lonely afternoon confined to my room, the sounds of laughter and merriment filtering through the closed door, a constant reminder of my exclusion. That Christmas, more than any other, cemented the dynamic in our family. Mark, the beloved son, the recipient of endless love and attention, and me, the outsider, the one constantly striving for approval, the one who always fell short. The memory faded, replaced by the sterile hum of the courthouse bathroom. I looked at my reflection again, the lines around my eyes notched with a deeper understanding. The boy who yearned for a red bicycle had grown into a man facing a far more complex battle, but the underlying emotions, the sense of injustice, the burning need for recognition remained the same. And just like that Christmas morning, I was determined to fight for what I believed in, for what was right, even if it meant going up against the forces that had always seemed insurmountable. I straightened my tie, took one last deep breath, and stepped out of the bathroom, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Justice will be served, one way or another, for Tess. And maybe, just maybe, for that 10-year-old boy who never got his bike. Flashback underscore to the fluorescent lights of the office hummed, a dull counterpoint to the roaring in my ears. My tie felt like a noose, tightening with every forced breath. Across the polished mahogany table, my brother, Mark, sat steepling his fingers, a smug smile playing on his lips. My brother. He looked so much like our father, the same sharp jawline, the same calculating glint in his eyes. It was a look I'd always envied, a look that seemed to radiate power and confidence. Now, it just made my stomach churn. "So, Jason," Mark began, his voice smooth as silk, "Dad's decided to make some adjustments to the succession plan." He paused, letting the words hang in the air like a guillotine blade poised to drop. "Adjustments," I echoed, my voice sounding thin and reedy even to my own ears. What kind of adjustments? I knew. I knew in the pit of my gut what was coming, but I clung to a sliver of hope, a desperate wish that my instincts were wrong. Mark leaned back in his chair, the smile widening. "Well, you know Dad's always valued practicality. And let's be honest, Jason, your artistic pursuits, while admirable, aren't exactly contributing to the bottom line." My hands clenched beneath the table. "I've been working in marketing for 5 years, Mark. I've brought in new clients. I've spearheaded successful campaigns." Yes, Mark interrupted, waving a dismissive hand. "Small potatoes, Jason. Dad's looking for someone with vision. Someone who can take Allen Industries to the next level." He paused again, the silence thick with unspoken words. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to meet his gaze. "And that someone is you?" I asked, the question barely a whisper. Mark's smile finally broke into a full-blown grin. "Dad believes I have the necessary acumen." The word hung in the air, a sharp jab to my gut. Acumen. It was a word Dad used constantly, a word he'd never used to describe me. I'd always been the creative one, the dreamer, the artist. Mark was the pragmatic one, the businessman, the heir apparent. Even as kids, it had always been Mark. Mark with the perfect grades, Mark with the athletic prowess, Mark with Dad's unwavering approval. "He's making you CEO?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Mark nodded, his eyes gleaming with triumph. Effective immediately, the room seemed to spin. Years of hard work, of trying to prove myself to my father, all washed away in a single sentence. I'd poured my heart and soul into Allen Industries, sacrificing my own dreams to contribute to the family business. And for what? To be cast aside like a broken toy. "But what about me?" I stammered, the words catching in my throat. "What am I supposed to do?" Mark shrugged, his indifference a physical blow. "Dad's offering you a severance package. A generous one, of course, enough to pursue your artistic endeavors. His tone dripped with condescension. My artistic endeavors, I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I gave up my artistic endeavors for this company. Mark's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something that might have been guilt, before it was quickly replaced by his usual smugness. Well, Jason, he said, his voice laced with a hint of amusement, perhaps you should have thought about that before you decided to play the dutiful son. The words stung. A brutal reminder of the years I'd spent trying to earn my father's love and respect. Years I'd wasted chasing a phantom, a validation that would never come. I stared at Mark, my vision blurring with inch tears. I wanted to lash out, to scream, to break something, but I didn't. I simply stood up, my chair scraping against the polished floor, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. Fine, I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. Fine. Give me the paperwork. Mark gestured towards a stack of documents on the table. I picked them up, my hands shaking so violently I could barely hold them. I didn't bother reading them. I didn't care what they said. All I cared about was getting out of that room, out of that building, away from the suffocating presence of my brother and the crushing weight of my father's betrayal. As I walked out of the office, I could feel Mark's eyes on my back, his gaze burning with a mixture of triumph and disdain. I didn't look back. I didn't say a word. I simply walked away, leaving behind the shattered remnants of my dreams and the bitter taste of injustice. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly before me, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, a constant reminder of the sterile, impersonal world I was now adrift in. Outside, the city thrummed with life, oblivious to the turmoil raging within me. Cars honked, people hurried past, the sounds blending into a cacophony that mirrored the chaos in my mind. I walked aimlessly, my feet carrying me through the crowded streets, my mind replaying the conversation with Mark over and over again. Each repetition of his words, each nuance of his tone, was a fresh wound, a constant reminder of my humiliation and defeat. I found myself in a small park, a patch of green amidst the concrete jungle. I sank onto a bench, the cool metal a welcome contrast to the burning anger that coursed through me. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the world, trying to find some semblance of peace in the midst of the storm raging within me. But the peace wouldn't come. All I could see was Mark's smug face, hear his condescending tone. The memory of my father's absence, his silent approval of Mark's betrayal, was a constant ache in my chest. I had always believed in family, in loyalty, in the inherent goodness of the people I loved. Now, that belief was shattered, replaced by a bitter cynicism that gnawed at my soul. The afternoon sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the park. The air grew cooler, a gentle breeze rustling through the leaves of the trees. I sat there for hours, lost in my thoughts, the world around me fading into a blur. As darkness fell, I finally stood up, my legs stiff and aching. I knew I couldn't stay there forever. I had to go somewhere, do something, but where, what? My life, as I had known it, was over. My career, my family, my sense of self, all ripped away from me in a single afternoon. I felt like a ghost, adrift in a world that no longer recognized me. I started walking again, my steps slow and uncertain. The city lights blurred around me, a kaleidoscope of color and movement that seemed both alluring and threatening. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't go back. Not yet. Not until I had found a way to deal with the pain, the anger, the overwhelming sense of betrayal that consumed me. I needed time, space, a chance to rebuild myself, to forge a new identity from the ashes of the old. And as I walked, a single thought began to take shape in my mind, a thought that would slowly, inexorably, transform into a burning desire for revenge, a desire to reclaim what was rightfully mine, to make my brother and father pay for the pain they had inflicted upon me, a desire that would consume me for years to come, until it finally culminated in the courtroom where I now sat, waiting for justice to be served. One way or another, the stale air of the precinct hung heavy, a mixture of disinfectant and despair. I, Jason Allen, sat across from Detective Miller, the fluorescent lights reflecting in the weariness of his eyes. He pushed a file across the table, the manila folder thin and inadequate for the weight of the tragedy it contained. "We've got statements from the neighbors," Miller said, his voice gravelly. "They heard shouting, a crash, saw Kate fleeing the scene." My stomach clenched. Kate, my daughter Tessa's estranged husband, the man who, according to the scant information the police had gathered so far, had savagely attacked her. My fingers tightened around the edge of the table. And Tess, Miller sighed, the sound heavy with unspoken things. She's in critical condition, Mr. Allen. Multiple fractures, internal bleeding. They're doing everything they can. Rowan, I croaked, my throat suddenly tight. My grandson, only 6 years old, had witnessed the whole thing. He'd run to a neighbor's house, his small face streaked with tears, babbling about a monster hurting his mommy. He's with Child Protective Services for now, Miller said. A social worker is with him. He's shaken up, understandably. I need to see him, I said, pushing myself to my feet. The room swam for a moment, and I gripped the back of the chair to steady myself. I understand, Miller said, his voice softening. I'll arrange it. But Mr. Allen, he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Try not to push him too hard. He's been through a lot. I nodded, the gesture jerky and uncontrolled. A lot. It was an understatement of epic proportions. My daughter, lying in a hospital bed, fighting for her life. My grandson, his innocence shattered, his world turned upside down. And Cade, the cause of all this pain, still out there. Justice will be served, one way or another. That, I swore to myself, was the only thing that mattered now. The meeting with Rowan was even harder than I'd imagined. He was huddled in a corner of a brightly colored playroom at CPS, clutching a stuffed dinosaur. His eyes, usually so full of life, were dull with shock. "Grandpa," he whispered, his voice barely audible, when he saw me. He reached out, and I knelt beside him, pulling him into a hug. His small body trembled against mine. "It's okay, Rowan," I murmured, stroking his hair. "You're safe now. The monster he hurt Mommy," Rowan sobbed, his words muffled against my shoulder. My jaw tightened. "I know, sweetheart, I know." I held him close, trying to convey a sense of security I myself didn't feel. We sat like that for a long time, the silence broken only by Rowan's occasional sobs. I didn't press him for details. I knew he'd talk when he was ready. Later, after leaving Rowan with the social worker, I found myself back in the sterile environment of the hospital waiting room. Tess was still in surgery. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness, each one a hammer blow against my already frayed nerves. My family, my brother and his wife, arrived, their faces etched with worrying. We sat in strained silence, united in our shared anxiety. "Any news, my brother?" Mark asked, his voice low. I shook my head, still in surgery. The hours crawled by. The waiting room filled and emptied, the ebb and flow of human suffering a constant reminder of the fragility of life. Finally, a doctor emerged, his face grim. He spoke in hushed tones, relaying the extent of Tess's injuries, the delicate nature of her condition. He used words like guarded prognosis and touch and go. My world narrowed to the doctor's voice, the words echoing in my ears. I heard my brother and his wife murmuring behind me, but their voices seemed to come from a great distance. All I could focus on was the image of Tess, broken and battered, clinging to life. "Can I see her?" I asked, my voice raspy. The doctor nodded, briefly. "She's still unconscious." Stepping into the ICU, I was hit by the antiseptic smell and the constant beep of machines. Tess lay in the bed, surrounded by tubes and wires, her face pale and bruised. My heart ached at the sight of her. My beautiful, vibrant daughter, reduced to this. I took her hand, her skin cool and clammy. "Tess," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "It's Dad. You're going to be okay. You have to be." I knew she couldn't hear me, but I needed to say the words, to cling to the hope they represented. The next few days blurred into a monotonous cycle of hospital visits, police interviews, and sleepless nights. I barely ate, barely slept. All my energy was focused on Tess's recovery, on finding Cade, and on making sure Rowan was safe. Then came the twist. It arrived in the form of a phone call, a hushed voice on the other end of the line. It was one of Cade's colleagues, a man named Ben. I'd met him a few times at company events. He'd always seemed quiet, almost timid. "Mr. Allen," Ben said, his voice hesitant, "I have some information about Cade. I think you need to see this." He wouldn't say more over the phone, insisting on a face-to-face meeting. My gut churned with a mixture of anticipation and dread. What could Ben possibly know? We met in a quiet corner of a nearly deserted diner, the booths worn and the air thick with the smell of stale coffee. Ben looked nervous, his hands fidgeting with a napkin. "I saw him, Mr. Allen," he said, his voice low. "I saw Cade the night it happened. My breath hitched. Where? He was at a bar, Ben said, his gaze fixed on the table. The Lucky Clover. It's not far from Tessa's apartment. My mind raced. The police had been focusing their search on areas outside the city, assuming Cade had fled. But he'd been right there, practically under their noses. Why, he was with someone, Ben continued, his voice barely a whisper. A woman. They were arguing. I heard him say something about framing someone. Framing someone. The words sent a chill down my spine. Who would Cade want to frame, and why? Suddenly, a terrifying thought occurred to me. Could he be trying to pin the attack on someone else? On me. Did you hear the woman's name? I asked, my voice tight. Ben hesitated, then shook his head. No, but I took a picture. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, his hand trembling as he scrolled through the photos. He stopped on a grainy image of Cade sitting at a bar, his back to the camera. Beside him, a woman with long, dark hair. Her face was partially obscured, but there was something familiar about her. I stared at the picture, my mind racing. Who was she, and what was her connection to Cade? This wasn't just a simple assault anymore. This was something far more complex, far more sinister, and I was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. I thanked Ben, assuring him I would keep his identity confidential. As he left, I sat there, staring at the photo on his phone. The grainy image seemed to pulse with hidden meaning, a key to unlocking the secrets surrounding Tessa's attack. I zoomed in on the woman, trying to get a clearer view of her face. Then, I saw it. A small, distinctive birthmark on her neck. My blood ran cold. I knew who she was. It was Sarah, Tessa's supposed best friend. Sarah, who had been so supportive in the weeks leading up to the separation, who had constantly been whispering in Tessa's ear, poisoning her against Cade. Sarah, who I had foolishly trusted. The pieces began to fall into place. Sarah and Cade, working together. But why? What could they possibly gain from framing me? I thought back to the will my father had left. He had specifically excluded Cade from inheriting anything, citing his unstable nature. Could Sarah and Cade have been working together to get their hands on Tessa's inheritance? If I were implicated in the attack, I would be out of the picture, leaving Tess, and potentially her son, as the sole beneficiaries. It was a twisted plan, but it made a chilling kind of sense. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. They hadn't just attacked Tess, they had attacked my entire family, and I would make them pay. I immediately called Detective Miller, explaining what I had discovered. He listened intently, his initial skepticism giving way to cautious interest. This changes things, Mr. Allen, he said, his voice grave. We need to bring Sarah in for questioning. I'll do whatever it takes, I said, my voice filled with a steely resolve. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice, for Tess, for Rowan, and for myself. I left the diner, the dim light of the street lamps casting long shadows. The night air was cool against my skin, but inside, I felt a burning rage. I knew this was just the beginning. The fight was far from over. But I had a new weapon now, a new piece of the puzzle, and I wouldn't rest until the whole truth was revealed. The stale air in the courtroom hung heavy, thick with anticipation. My knuckles were white against the polished wood of the table, reflecting the fluorescent lights overhead. My lawyer, Ms. Klein, leaned over, her voice low. Mr. Allen, are you ready for the verdict? As I'll ever be, I muttered, my throat dry. My gaze swept across the room, landing on Cade. He sat rigid, his eyes darting nervously between the judge and the jury box. He looked pale, thinner than I remembered. Good. Let him stew. Let him feel the weight of what he'd done. Justice will be served, one way or another. That was the thought that had propelled me through these agonizing months. The memory of Tess, broken and battered in her hospital bed, fueled a fire in my gut. The image of my grandson, Rowan, his small face streaked with tears as he recounted the horror he'd witnessed, hardened my resolve. Cade would pay. The judge cleared his throat, the sound amplified in the sudden hush of the courtroom. Members of the jury, have you reached a verdict? The foreman, a stern-faced woman with steel-rimmed glasses, rose. We have, Your Honor. My heart hammered against my ribs. I held my breath. In the matter of Jason Allen versus Cade Miller, on the counts of assault and battery, as well as violation of a restraining order, we find the defendant. She paused, drawing the moment out with agonizing slowness. Guilty. A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost buckled my knees. I glanced at Tess, who sat beside me, her hand clasped tightly in mine. A faint smile touched her lips, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in weeks. Rowan, nestled beside her, looked up at me with wide, hopeful eyes. Cade's face was ashen. He stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. His lawyer placed a hand on his shoulder, murmuring something I couldn't hear. It didn't matter. He'd lost. But this was just the beginning. The criminal trial was one thing, but the civil suit, the one that would strip him of everything he held dear, was still to come. And that was where my real revenge lay. The judge addressed Cade. "Mr. Miller, sentencing will be scheduled for next month. Until then, you'll remain in custody." Bailiffs moved in, flanking Cade. He offered no resistance, his movements sluggish, defeated. As they led him away, his eyes met mine. For a fleeting moment, I saw a flicker of fear, a raw, primal terror that sent a thrill of satisfaction through me. The courtroom buzzed with activity as people began to file out. "Ms. Klein patted my arm. "Congratulations, Mr. Allen. We got him." "We're not done yet," I said, my voice low. Back in Ms. Klein's office, we reviewed the details of the upcoming civil suit. "The evidence we've gathered regarding Cade's fraudulent business dealings is irrefutable," she explained, spreading a stack of documents across her desk. "He's been embezzling funds from his company for years, funneling the money into offshore accounts. We can seize those assets, along with his properties, and ensure he's left with nothing." "Good," I said, a grim satisfaction settling over me. "He deserves nothing." "And then there's the matter of the inheritance," Ms. Klein continued. "Your father's will stipulated that Cade would receive a significant portion of his estate upon his marriage to Tess. However, given the circumstances, we can argue for its revocation. My father, bless his soul, had been blinded by Cade's charm. He'd seen him as the perfect son-in-law, successful and ambitious. He'd never seen the darkness that lurked beneath the surface. Now, that darkness had been exposed for all to see. The following weeks were a whirlwind of depositions, hearings, and legal maneuvering. Cade's lawyers fought tooth and nail, but they were fighting a losing battle. The evidence against him was overwhelming. His lies, his deceit, his violence, it was all laid bare for the court to see. One evening, as I sat reviewing the final draft of the settlement agreement, the phone rang. It was Tess. "Dad," she said, her voice trembling. "Cade's confessed." My heart skipped a beat. "Confessed to what?" "Everything," she whispered. "The embezzlement, the assault, even admitted that he attacked me to try and stop the divorce. He said he was afraid I'd take half of everything he had." I closed my eyes, a wave of exhaustion washing over me. It was finally over. The final hearing was a formality. Cade, looking gaunt and defeated, sat silently as the judge read the terms of the settlement. He was stripped of his assets, his business, his inheritance. He was left with nothing but the clothes on his back and the prospect of a lengthy prison sentence. As I left the courthouse, the setting sun cast long shadows across the street. The air was crisp and cool, a welcome change from the stifling atmosphere of the courtroom. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of closure I hadn't expected. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. It was about protecting my family. It was about showing Rowan that even in the darkest of times, good can prevail. Later that evening, I sat with Tess and Rowan in their living room. Rowan was playing with his toy cars, a carefree smile on his face. Tess looked at me, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Dad," she said softly, "for everything." I reached out and took her hand. "You don't need to thank me, sweetheart. I'd do anything for you and Rowan." The legal battles were over, but the healing process was just beginning. There would be scars, both physical and emotional, that would take time to fade, but we would face them together, as a family. We had weathered the storm, and we had emerged stronger, more united than ever before. The fight had been long and arduous, but it had been worth it. Justice had been served, and in the quiet of that evening, surrounded by the people I loved most, I finally felt at peace. The darkness had receded, replaced by a glimmer of hope, a promise of a brighter future. We had lost so much, but we had also gained something invaluable, the unwavering knowledge that we had each other, and that together, we could overcome anything. The silence in the room was comfortable, punctuated only by the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the soft clatter of Rowan's toys. I watched him for a moment, his small brow furrowed in concentration as he lined up his cars. He looked up at me, his eyes bright. "Grandpa," he said, Can we go to the park tomorrow? I smiled. Of course, buddy. We can do whatever you want, he grinned, a gap-toothed smile that warmed my heart. In that moment, all the pain, all the anger, all the bitterness of the past few months faded away. All that remained was the quiet joy of being with my family, safe and sound. Tess leaned her head against my shoulder, her eyes closed. It's finally over, Dad, she whispered. Yes, I said, holding her close. It's finally over. The legal proceedings had concluded, but the emotional aftermath would linger. There would be therapy sessions, support groups, and countless quiet moments of reflection, but we would face them together, one step at a time. We had been through hell and back, but we had survived. We had fought for justice, and we had won. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The money, the property, the inheritance, those were just things. What truly mattered was the love we shared, the bond that had held us together through the darkest of times. And as I looked at Tess and Rowan, I knew that no matter what the future held, we would face it together, stronger and more resilient than ever before. The storm had passed, and the sun was finally beginning to shine. We had found our peace, we had found our payoff,